Hello, and welcome to We Live for Saturday, your favorite college football podcast. I'm your co-host, Mike, and with me tonight is the return of your guest co-host, Dom the Rev. Dom, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing good, Mike. It's good to be back. It's good to talk about some football. We've got playoff rankings. We got Big Ten games starting on Friday. I'm ready to get to it, man.
Let's do it. Should we jump right into those playoff rankings as long as you brought them up?
Let's do it. This is Big Ten. Big Ten is the center of the football playoff universe right now.
Yeah. So for the first time ever, I believe so, in the playoff era, the Big Ten has the number 1 and number 2 teams in the playoff rankings.
Yeah, and 4 teams of the 12-team field. It gets goofy with the bracketing. You know, Ohio State can't get a first-round bye as a number 2 ranked team.
Right.
So they'd be seeded 5th, but ranked 2nd. It's fun. We'll figure it out as we get closer. But it was a good initial rankings for the Big Ten. I thought a lot of credit given to Penn State, where they wound up landing in the rankings.
Yeah.
But I think that this playoff committee has shown that they're going to emphasize, in some respects, a lot of analytical tools, because I saw this online. There are a couple of places that will run a simulation of their best approximation of what a BCS formula would have given us.
Right. Okay.
And, hey, the criticism of the BCS was always it relies too heavily on computers. It's too much analytics. There's no human element here. The exact same, and I wish I would have written down what account it was that put it up, but the exact same top 12 from their BCS style formula was the same top 12 that the playoff committee spat out. The one difference, and this is why I've always said the BCS was a great system, is that it would have switched Tennessee and Indiana at that 7 and 8 spot, seeds 8 and 9. Because, again, of the bracketing rules. But other than that, top 12 in order of what we would have gotten from a BCS system. So I guess the more things change, the more they stay the same. But I think that gives us some insight into what the committee is going to prioritize going forward.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. And the committee it's for the Big Ten to have 4 teams in the top 8 and to have 4 teams in the field potentially is a big deal. And that's a really impressive, and it's a little, go on.
Well, I was going to say, interestingly, the way that bracket is set up, because of the placement of those 4 teams, Oregon could theoretically win the national title if this was the bracket, only playing Big Ten games.
That's really funny.
As the number 1 seed, they'd get the winner of the 8-9 game. So if Indiana had beaten Tennessee, again, in our little hypothetical, Oregon would play Indiana in the quarterfinals. And, of course, Ohio State, as the number 2 seed, has to drop down. A number 2 ranked team has to drop down to the number 5 seed. But it gives them 2 games they would be favored in, against Boise State and against Brigham Young. So you could imagine then Oregon facing Ohio State in the semifinals. And then
for the third time
this year. And then you could imagine, this is more of a stretch, but Penn State at that number 7 seed could come through their side of the bracket and set up an Oregon-Penn State national championship game. So with the bracket as constructed right now, and of course, this is never going to be how things shake out in the end. Very famously, the first ever 4-team bracket had 3 teams from the same division, right? These things always shuffle. They always shuffle. But if this were the bracket, Oregon could win it by only playing Big Ten games.
That would be crazy. That would drive people south of the Mason-Dixon line off the wall.
Oh, it would.
Can you imagine Paul Feinbaum? Paul, how did we get here, Paul?
Paul would be Phyllis, and all of Paul's callers would be off their mind, off their rockers. It would be way too much. But yeah. That's what you get when you get 4 teams in the field. And this is why, you get grandstanding from the Big Ten and the SEC. Like, we need guaranteed bids for this many teams. But, it leads itself to this level of absurdity. Bids. Well, no, you don't. Obviously, you don't.
Yeah.
Right? Because here is the Big Ten with those teams, those 4 teams that are in there, have a combined guaranteed 2 more losses, right? Because Indiana's going to play Ohio State. One of those teams is going to lose.
Yep.
And then 2 of those 4 teams are your likely matchup in the Big Ten championship game.
Yep.
2 more losses between those 4 teams. It's hard to see them falling out. It could happen, but it's hard to see it right now.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're right. It's the Big Ten set up in a great position. I think all the rankings were pretty fair. I would quibble when you get down to the bottom, the last 5 in. I think Iowa should probably be ranked, if I'm being totally honest. Like, yeah, they had a rough. I didn't like the loss to Sparty wasn't great, but they've been dominant for the most part.
It will be interesting to see what happens with the playoff rankings at sort of rank lines 17 to 25.
Yeah.
Because I think that's where you saw a lot of like throwing in 2, 3 loss SEC teams.
Always right, SEC teams.
All that and down at the bottom, number 25, Army. The only team after last week, the only team to never trail this year. You know? And now they're doing it with a backup quarterback. So it'll be interesting to see where Army, because I don't think Army could make it through this season. Again, Notre Dame's on the schedule. They'll get credit if they win that. But Army make it through this season. I don't think they're going to do worse than 1 more loss. It'll be interesting to see where they land at the end of all of this, because they're having a.
They might lose to Navy.
Ooh, I don't think so. I don't not the way Navy looked last week. They wouldn't.
Yeah. Okay. They had a bad week. Sure.
Okay. We'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see.
I mean, I'm not guaranteeing it, but I think it could go either way. That's a rivalry game.
Oh, sure. Game. It's a good American Conference year, not just a good Service Academy year.
Yeah.
And Navy, to be fair, is having one too. But I think Army's probably the better team between the 2.
Yeah. Well, we'll find out. That's the fun part.
It all gets settled on the field. So let's get to the field, huh?
Yeah. Let's talk about these games. Absolutely. So we have only 6 games this week. A lot of teams are on bye. So a little lighter slate. And to start off, the first game is on Friday, November 8th. We have the 6-3 Iowa Hawkeyes heading out west, take on the UCLA Bruins. This is an 8 p.m. game on Fox. The line is Iowa by 5.5. So the Iowa Hawkeyes are coming off an emphatic beatdown against rival Wisconsin, 42-10. Hawkeyes have seemingly righted the ship after the embarrassing loss to Sparty back in week 8, and they seem to be playing their best ball of the season right now. Since starting QB Cade McNamara got hurt, the offense has improved. Brendan Sullivan hasn't been a big threat in the passing game, but he's a lot more agile than McNamara is. And his threat to run has opened up the offense for all-world running back Caleb Johnson and that elite run-blocking Iowa O-line. Their D continues to be solid, although not as dominant as past Phil Parker units. Iowa is just as salty stopping the run this year, but it's a little more gettable in the passing game, ranking just 43rd in the country in passing D, giving up a little over 200 yards per game through the air. So this might be key in this game, as UCLA can't really run the ball, but they've won 2 games in a row on the arm of QB Ethan Garbers. UCLA beat Rutgers and then Nebraska with a bye week sandwich in between, and Garbers has been great in both wins. Bruin signal caller completed 68% of his passes against Nebraska for 219 yards, a solid 8.8 yards per attempt, 2 TDs, and 0 picks for a QBR of 94.4. I bring this up because I think that Ethan Garbers will need a similarly efficient and prolific performance to keep up with the Hawkeyes. Iowa's averaging 31 points per game this season due to the brilliance of Caleb Johnson and that O-line. So the question is, can UCLA score 30-ish points against this Iowa D? I think it'll take a big game from Garbers. I'm also going to take contributions from a plethora of receiving options like Quasi Gilmer, Maliki Mataveo, Logan Loya, and J. Michael Sturdivant, who in particular has been a little quiet of late after flashing against a very good Minnesota secondary earlier in the year. So, Dom, how do you see this one breaking down?
Well, you said it about agile quarterbacks, but you said it about Sullivan. UCLA's leading rusher in all of their wins has been Ethan Garbers.
Yeah.
The Hawaii win was Ethan Garbers. Rutgers, Ethan Garbers. Nebraska, Ethan Garbers. And I don't think that's a formula that's going to work against the Iowa Hawkeyes. Right? Being able to move Garbers around, Garbers being able to improvise. This has set him up to have those big days that you mentioned in those wins. The other thing that set them up in those wins has been turnovers.
Yeah.
Right? Well, if we look at matchups, the best comparison I've got that Iowa's really faced this year is Northwestern Jack Lausch. Jack Lausch can move around. He had exactly one positive run in the game against Iowa. Went for 14 yards.
Right.
But when you factor in a couple of sacks, his total rushing for the day was -3. Right? If UCLA is hoping to force turnovers in this game, they're going up against an offense that might not have to throw the ball 10 times.
I mean, that's about what they threw at last game.
It is. And Sullivan knows his job. His job is to give the ball to Caleb Johnson. The line can just fire off. Right? Iowa can run the ball and I think has a chance to control this game from the jump. I don't think the Bruins are going to get a foothold in this game. And Iowa is just going to dictate whatever this game is going to be played at. And frankly, I think Iowa is sick and tired of being told they can't score. And so they've been trying to score.
Yep.
And doing it in a very Iowa fashion. So you get special teams, you get runs, you get just taking the will of the other team. And I can't see UCLA's little hot streak continuing. Although it's worth pointing out that UCLA doesn't have to leave the West Coast again this year.
That's interesting.
Which it may be advantageous for them as they try and build something to the end of this season. But I think this is going to be Iowa's ball game to lose, and I don't think they're going to.
What's your score?
I'll take the Hawkeyes 38, UCLA 17. At least one of those touchdowns is garbage time.
Sure. I mean, I think UCLA is going to move the ball through the air at times. I think this is going to be interesting for the first half. I could see it being close at half and everybody wondering what's wrong with Iowa. And, Ethan Garbers has a little momentum and all that kind of stuff. But the thing about run after run after run from a generational running back is that you can stop him for a while. Sure. But eventually, the offense is going to figure out which one of your defenders can't tackle in space. And they're going to scheme to make sure Caleb Johnson has opportunities to go one-on-one with guys who aren't great tacklers. Wherever they are in your defense, he's going to find them. And all Johnson has to do is break one long run to open up the floodgates and start the onslaught. So I personally believe that Caleb Johnson is the second best running back in the country behind Ashton Genty at Boise State. He's the best Iowa running back since Sean Green, and Sean Green won the Doak Walker Award for best running back in the country. So Johnson is special, and it takes a special effort to stop him. I don't think Washington can stop Johnson for 4 quarters, plain and simple. So I've got the Iowa Hawkeyes 34, the UCLA Bruins 16.
Yeah, totally reasonable. Terry Hepner, the late great Terry Hepner, when he was coaching at Indiana, Hoosiers had this fullback named Josiah Sears.
Sure.
Right. And what Hep used to say about Sears is he's going to get the ball in the first quarter. He's going to plow into a linebacker. He's going to get 2 yards. But we're going to keep running the ball. And in the fourth quarter, the other team's going to get tired. They're going to put their hands on their hips. And he's still going to weigh 242 pounds. And sure enough, his yards per carry would tick up the whole way through the game. Now, Josiah Sears was no Caleb Johnson. But that is the way I feel. That Hepner quote comes to my mind every time I think about this Iowa team. Because you said game could be close at halftime. I said, and how many times have we seen that? And then Iowa scores 28 points in the second half. It happens over and over because you just can't keep stopping them.
The speed with which they get to the edge on that stretch play, and not just Johnson, but like the lineman too, is crazy. It's crazy. And like you can keep up with it for a while, but after a while, it just starts getting you. So yeah, Johnson, he's awesome. And it's going to be really funny to see what Kirk Ferentz does without him next year, because he is the offense. But as long as he's there, the offense is going to look good. So good for Iowa. All right.
And it's going to propel Iowa into those discussions. Bottom half of the top 25, top of the second tier of the Big Ten. That's what you're looking at. And Iowa's got a schedule to make some noise. So we keep trying to move on. So let's do it.
Absolutely. All right. The rest of these games will be played on Saturday, November 9th. First up, we have the 1-7 Purdue Boilermakers going to Columbus to take on the 7-1, number 2 ranked Ohio State Buckeyes. This is an 11 a.m. game on Fox, the big noon game, and the line is Ohio State by 38. So, Dom, I'm not sure what to say about this game, so I'm going to say this. Ohio State is 3rd nationally in the country in points per game allowed at just 12 points per game. They just beat an extremely good Penn State team and held them to just 13 points, and only 6 of those were by the offense. So this is the best defense in the country, in my opinion. And on offense, Ohio State's averaging 38 points per game, good for 15th best nationally. By contrast, Purdue ranks 119th in scoring offense out of 133 FBS teams. The Boilermakers are even worse in scoring defense, ranking 127th out of 133 FBS teams, good for dead last in the Big Ten. So you've got the number 2 team in the nation playing against by far the worst team in the Big Ten. This isn't going to be a game. This is going to be a showcase for Ohio State to show off their freakish talent on both sides of the ball against the totally hapless Boilermakers. The only question in this game will be, when does Ryan Day call off the dogs and put in the backups? I've got that happening sometime in the middle of the third quarter. So I've got the Ohio State Buckeyes 56, the Purdue Boilermakers 6. Dom, how do you see this one breaking down?
Yeah, listen, there's not much more to say, right? FPI gives Purdue a 1% chance to win this game. I think that is as low as it can go.
Yeah.
Right?
They'd have to get like 7 turnovers.
This defense cannot stop a nosebleed.
No.
They gave up 442 yards to Northwestern, 421 yards to Oregon, 556 yards to Illinois in a game, I reiterate, they should have won.
Yep.
And 589 yards to Wisconsin.
And Wisconsin is not doing anything to anybody else.
No. Ohio State, conversely, gained 358 yards against a good Penn State defense. 285 yards against a Nebraska defense that probably played the game of their season against Ohio State.
Definitely did.
Right? Ohio State gained 467 yards against the number 1 team in the country, Oregon, and 412 against an Iowa team we were just singing the praises of. Again, the only question is how long the starters stay in.
Yeah.
I have seen enough, and as an Indiana fan who grew up outside of West Lafayette, I have heard enough about fluky Purdue wins over Ohio State to know that anything can happen. But that particular brand of anything, I don't see happening at noon on Saturday. But I will take the points. Ohio State 42, Purdue 7.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, it all depends when they call it off. That's all.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's really kind of your dream season with Indiana undefeated and Purdue the worst team in the Big Ten. It all kind of came together for you this year.
You know, things like to line up sometimes. I'll reserve dream season for after beating Purdue.
Sure.
Because it is just the luck of the Indiana football fan that something would go nuts like that. I don't see it happening.
No.
Knock, right? But I'll reserve that. Seeing Purdue come out of the Big Ten West and into what I like to call reality has been just joyful, right? There have been Big Ten West teams that can compete. Iowa, Minnesota have looked great coming into the new non-divisional structure. Illinois looked good.
Yep.
Right? There have been some, Nebraska, Purdue, right? Wisconsin, who have gotten a taste of what the Michigan States, Rutgers, Marylands, and Indianas of the world have had to endure for the last 10 years. When did we get rid of legends and leaders, right?
I think it was 2012.
Oh, sounded like legends and losers, and it was just as palatable.
Yeah, that was bad. It's bad branding.
Terrible.
All right. Moving on to the next game. We have the 6-3 Minnesota Golden Gophers going to Piscataway, take on the 4-4 Rutgers Scarlet Knights. This is an 11 a.m. game on NBC. The line is Minnesota by 6. Started at 4.5, was bet up to 6.5, now settled in at 6. Excuse me. There is so much to talk about in this game. First off, there's a ton of familiarity between these two teams and between these two staffs. So to just give you the Cliff's notes on it, Rutgers OC Kirk Soraka was the OC for Minnesota under Fleck during 2 different stints, the last of which was in 2021. He and Fleck spent a long time together, and Kirk left on strange terms both times. Although both times he was ostensibly going home to the area of the country where he's from. Once he went to Penn State, and then Rutgers paid him a ton to leave Minnesota. So a lot of familiarity there. And I think he's originally from New Jersey. So it did make sense that Soraka went there. And, you know, frankly, Minnesota's been better off with Greg Harbaugh anyway. So it's all kind of worked out for both sides. Fleck himself, though, coached under Shianu in the past at Rutgers during his first stint with the school as wide receivers coach back in 2010, 2011. Their defensive coordinator, Joe Harrisimiak, was the safeties coach at Minnesota for a couple years. Minnesota's defensive coordinator, Corey Heatherman, was Rutgers linebackers coach last season before coming to Dinkytown this year. Rutgers starting quarterback, Ethan Kaliak-Manis, was the starting quarterback for Minnesota last year. And safety Flip Dixon came over from Minnesota in a tampering episode that left bad blood on both sides and still leaves a bad taste in my mouth.
Would you say they flipped him?
Yeah, I would say they flipped him. They flipped him for sure. And that still pisses me off because he's a good player and there was some chicanery going on there. But anyway, I digress. So there's a ton of familiarity between these two staffs. And while there's a lot of camaraderie there, there's also a lot of familiarity there. And familiarity breeds contempt. And with the way Ethan was shown the door after his subpar effort at Minnesota, and I would say last year, reportedly his effort was subpar both on and off the field, you can bet that both teams want to win this one badly. Rutgers is on a 4-game losing streak, but they just had a bye week to get ready for Minnesota. And more importantly, they had 2 weeks to get some guys healthy because they've been really banged up and had a lot of guys not playing, particularly on that defense. So I expect a much better Rutgers team to show up compared to the injury-riddled unit that got its butt kicked the last several times out this year. I think this is going to be more like the Rutgers we saw in September, which was a more competitive team. So if Rutgers can run the ball with Kyle Monangai and get back to the kind of ball they were playing earlier in the year, they can make this a game. Teams like Iowa have run on Minnesota, although the Gophers have done the better job stopping the run during their 4-game win streak than they did in that Iowa game back in September. But that's the hope. Also, look for Rutgers to try to establish wide receiver Demir Miller like they did last time out against USC. They will need a difference maker in the passing game to open up holes for Monangai, and they need someone who can make plays against a very talented Minnesota secondary. So for Rutgers, I think if this is going to be a game, you got to get Monangai going. You got to hope Ethan hits a few throws and doesn't turn the ball over, and that your D can slow Minnesota down. So, Dom, how do you see this one breaking down?
You hit on it, right? You have two teams that are going in opposite directions right now.
Yep.
Right? That if you talk to me at the beginning of the year as we're just getting into Big Ten play, I was joking around with some folks that I know who are Rutgers alums and said, you're going to have to talk to your friends and family about a possibility of an undefeated Rutgers and an undefeated Indiana in the Big Ten championship game, right?
Right.
And Minnesota kind of sputtered out of the gate. Was FBS football too much for Max Brosmer? We didn't know. It didn't. And lately, it's felt like Minnesota has started to figure some things out, and it's felt like Rutgers has started to get figured out in a lot of ways. But I looked at Rutgers' schedule after this bye week, right? The bye week last week. They have to feel like if they win this game, that bowl eligibility is very much on the table, right? The remaining schedule goes Maryland, Illinois, Michigan State.
Yeah.
They got to feel like they can win one of those.
Sure.
If they lose this game, they got to feel like they're skiing uphill.
Oh, yeah.
Trying to win two of those.
Right.
And if I look at these two teams, they both have running backs that I feel like I can trust.
Yes.
Right? I feel like I can trust Darius Taylor. I feel like I can trust Kyle Monangai. I can't trust myself to spell Monangai. Spelled Kaliak Manis right on my first try in my notes, though. I was very happy about that. Monangai, 7 tries. I don't think I have it right yet.
Sure.
But neither team is really been prioritizing sort of the aerial offense, right? I think you've said this with John, that the key with Ethan Kaliakmanis is kind of managing Ethan Kaliakmanis.
Yes.
Right? Making sure that you don't put too much on him. Not in a Brendan Sullivan sort of sense, but in like a complementary football sort of sense.
You don't want Ethan thinking out there too much. He doesn't do well when he has to think about things. He needs easy, clear reads and like to know where he's going with the ball.
Right. Whereas Max Brosmer, I feel like at this point is someone that you can put some things onto. You can say, go see what you see and make your reads, make your plays.
Yeah. And Brosmer has been, he's been repeatedly praised by Fleck and by his offensive coordinator Harbaugh for his processing ability. And you can see it on Saturdays. I mean, the guy goes through his reads. I mean, he goes bam, bam, bam,
bang. Exactly. Yeah. And so if I'm looking at these two teams as they match up, they both have things I like, but they're kind of the same thing.
Right.
Right? I think both teams will be able to run.
Yeah.
But if I have to pick a defense that I trust, it's probably Minnesota's, especially in that secondary.
Yes.
Right?
Secondary is very good.
If I have to pick a quarterback I trust, it's Minnesota's. I think Brosmer is more dependable at this point in the season. I don't think it's going to be a high-scoring game. I don't think it's going to be a blowout one way or the other, but I think I trust Minnesota. I think Minnesota keeps themselves in those same conversations we're talking about Iowa trying to be in.
Yep.
I think the Gophers will pull this one out. But I don't think that it's going to be very emphatic.
Sure. So what's your score?
Minnesota 28, Rutgers 20.
Okay. Yeah. I think that the problem Rutgers has that Minnesota's peaking at the right time, playing at a high level on both sides of the ball, and also they have a bye week after this week. So there's no looking ahead. There's no catching Minnesota napping. Like, this is the game before the bye. It's plenty circled. There's plenty of personal animus and reasons why Minnesota is going to be plenty motivated for this game. I think an underrated change we saw was the addition of redshirt Frosh Phillip Daniels to the offensive line, because he's taken an already good offensive line, made it even better, because Quinn Carroll, who is an average tackle, was rated as Pro Football Focus's top guard in the country last week when he got to move to guard. And if Daniels played very well at tackle. So the Gopher O-line have been an elite pass blocking O-line all year, but lately they've been opening up holes in the running game as well, which is a really good sign for the Gophers. Gophers QB Max Brosner had a great fourth quarter, but he didn't have his best game against Illinois. So I think he's going to bounce back and play better against Rutgers. And while I think Rutgers will keep this close, I just think Minnesota's the better team. I think Brosmer currently ranks in the top 10 nationally in QB rating, which is really impressive, especially considering how inconsistent he was his first couple games. But at this point, Brosmer is completing 68% of his passes for the year. And lately, it's been over 70% of his passes. And I just think you see the party roll on for Minnesota. So I also predict that Minnesota scores in this game on either defense or special teams. I think it could be like a Coy Parrott situation that we're going to get into on a punt return or something like that, or an interception. So I think that's going to happen. And I've got the Minnesota Golden Gophers 34, the Rutgers Scarlet Knights 20.
Half right as usual.
Yep, exactly. All right, next up, we have the 5-4 Michigan Wolverines heading to Bloomington, take on the 9-0, number 8 ranked Indiana Hoosiers. This is the 2:30 p.m. game on CBS. Cue the horns. And the line is Indiana by 14. Oh, how the tables have turned. A year ago, Michigan was cruising to a Big Ten title and subsequent national championship, while the Hoosiers were playing out an uninspired slate behind lame duck coach Tom Allen. Now the Wolverines are in free fall. This program lost its head coach and a bunch of NFL draft picks, and the results have been far below expectations. By contrast, Indiana's 9-0, ranked number 8 in the latest college football playoff poll under phenom first-year head coach Curt Cignetti and his superstar squad. Indiana's meteoric 2024 rise is one of the great college football stories of this whole century. But will the party go on against a very talented, if underachieving opponent this week? So let's look at this from Michigan's perspective at first. If you're Michigan, you're absolutely desperate to win this game. Your whole season's been disappointing, and taking down a top-ranked team would feel like real progress for first-year coach Sharon Moore, who has largely floundered in the role thus far. The good news for Michigan is that Davis Warren is turning into a perfectly average Big Ten quarterback. He isn't this dynamic force, but he's completing 65% of his passes, and he's shown improvement in recent weeks. Last week against Oregon, he was just 12 for 21, but he did manage 164 yards on nearly 8 yards per attempt, 2 TDs, no picks. So he did that against a great Oregon defense. The week before that, he was even more efficient against Michigan State in the victory. So can Michigan get the running game going against Indiana? They absolutely need to if they're going to have a chance to win. Michigan needs to keep IU's offense off the field as much as possible, shorten the game, limit possessions. They can't try to get into a shootout with Curtis Rourke or they are going to lose. So Colston Loveland should be a mismatch for Indiana. If he can get his 6 to 8 catches for 100 plus yards, that would be absolutely huge for the offense. He's the second best tight end in the Big Ten, in my opinion. And he did that against Oregon last week. So if he did it against a great Oregon D, can he do it against Indiana this week? Because the problem Michigan has is that these wide receivers just aren't very good. And that's a big part of the reason why Michigan is a 14-point underdog in this game. For Indiana, you just got to keep doing what you're doing. You keep running the ball enough to keep the defense honest and then annihilate the defense downfield behind the arm of Curtis Rourke, the talent of Elijah Surratt, and the rest of this deep and really plucky receiving core. So, Dom, how do you see this one playing out for your beloved Hoosiers?
Do you know how many yards per game Indiana gives up on the ground?
Not a lot.
74.8, I believe, is the number I saw.
Yeah,
tops in the
good.
Big Ten. And that is what Michigan will need to do to stay in this game.
Yes.
Right? So let's look at these two teams because they have a lot of similarities, right? If you look at SP Plus for your analytic catch-all stat of choice, right? Indiana has the number 18 defense in the country. Again, mostly behind that stout run D, right?
Yep.
Michigan has the number 14 defense in the country by SP Plus. They've been very good at limiting their opponents' opportunities to score. Special teams. Indiana has the number 12 special teams unit in the country. Right? They have a kicker who has not missed a kick, not asked to kick a lot of field goals, but has kicked a lot of extra points. Right? James Evans is a great punter who has not had a lot of chances to do it this year, and they kick a lot of touchbacks on kickoffs. Michigan, very good special teams as well. Right? Number 14, just like their defense. So two phases of the game where, in terms of an analytical snapshot, these two teams are really very similar. Now let's talk about how they're different. Michigan's offense, and I understand this is a season-long statistic, but it adjusts based on how you perform. Michigan's offense is 77th in the country. Indiana's is 14th. And I know Indiana gets dinged on the schedule argument, but here's the thing. Indiana has faced good defenses this year.
Yeah.
The Nebraska team that Indiana beat by 49 has the number 9 defense in the country, according to this same metric. Washington has the number 24 defense in the country, according to this same metric. Against those two teams in 3 halves of Taven Jackson football, Indiana scored 59 points. In 1 half of Curtis Rourke against Nebraska, Indiana scored 28. What I'm saying is, even with a good defense, unless you're forcing a ton of turnovers, and even then, just ask Maryland, you still have to score to hang with Indiana. Michigan hasn't shown me the ability to score at the level that they would need to score. The game's in Bloomington. Indiana fans remember so many times that they should have beaten Michigan and didn't. I don't think the Wolverines are going to be able to keep up, and that's not an indictment on them. I think that's how good this Indiana team is, especially on offense. I think you have to score over 40 to beat them, and Michigan just doesn't. And Indiana has a good defense. So I'm going to take the Hoosiers 42, Michigan 24.
All right. I will be honest. I think Michigan makes this a game. I think Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant make a big impact early in this game, moving the line of scrimmage and putting pressure on the Hoosiers. I think Jair Hill is on pace to play at corner, and Will Johnson. Okay, a lot of this is conditional on me thinking Will Johnson is going to play. Right?
Sure.
So I'm assuming Jair Hill looks like he's going to play, and Will Johnson is maybe. Let's assume, because it's more fun that way, that Will Johnson plays. He does that, then all of a sudden, Michigan has corners like Indiana hasn't seen all year. So the Hoosiers are having a dream season, but can they play a great game every week? Or do they inevitably have to have a down week where maybe there's a couple turnovers? Maybe Curtis Rourke isn't so transcendent. So I'm saying that maybe this is the week where it doesn't look as good as it's looked the rest of the year. I think Michigan comes out, punches Indiana in the mouth, takes a lead in this game. I think Michigan might even have the lead at half, or that it'll be close deep into the third quarter. I think the Wolverines force turnovers on defense, maybe on special teams. They blocked a punt or two this year. Maybe that comes out. So I think things look bleak for the Hoosiers in the first half of this one. But ultimately, football games often come down to coaching and quarterback play. And I think Curt Cignetti and Curtis Rourke are just a lot better than Sharon Moore and Davis Warren. So I think that's the difference in this one. I think Indiana comes from behind and wins this one. And late in the game, it's closer than anyone expects it to be. So I've got the Indiana Hoosiers 30, the Michigan Wolverines 24.
Low scoring.
Yeah. Well, it has to be if it's going to be close. So, I mean, I think what you're saying is very likely. Like, don't get me wrong. And I will not be surprised at all if Indiana rattles off and wins this one by 3 touchdowns. But I do think Michigan is really talented, and I think they're trending in a good direction. And I think they could play well enough to make this one a game.
Oh, listen, 42-24 as a scoreline. Like, that is reminiscent of games that Indiana has been in, even when they didn't trail, right? Obviously, they trailed last week for the first time all year when Michigan State came out and did exactly what you said. Punched him right in the face, moved the ball. Aiden Childs was making throws that were spot on. Indiana was getting run on, which only happened in the first quarter of that game, but boy, did it.
Yep.
Right? And all of a sudden you go, okay, what's happening? Indiana goes 3 and out. That second 3 and out was a bad drop, but looked like the offense might not be in rhythm. Curtis Rourke looked like someone who just had thumb surgery, right? And that game ends 47-10.
Yeah.
Indiana turned the ball over 4 times against Maryland. We can talk about how good Maryland is, and we will soon, right? 4 turnovers in that game. Final score is 42-28, right? Northwestern, similarly, in a game that ended 41-24, right? That was a 3-point game in the second half.
Right.
And I speak for all Indiana Hoosiers fans when I say there was bag breathing going on. I think this can be a tight game and still end up with a scoreline that looks like the one that I laid out there.
Sure.
Because Curt Cignetti tries to end you.
Oh, yeah.
You saw the Michigan State game went for 2 4th downs on the last series of the game just to run the clock out.
Yeah.
Right? He is going to go for things. He's going to and so I think that I'm rationalizing picking Indiana in a high scoring game, a team that's lowest point total all year has been 31, right? So I'm talking myself into it. But I believe Michigan has a lot to prove in this game, and they're going to try and do it. And speaking of your argument with the Minnesota game, both of these teams have byes next week.
Yeah.
So neither team is going to feel like they have anything to lose.
Yep.
I can tell you this is an Indiana team that desperately wants to beat Michigan in front of people.
Yeah.
Because they beat Michigan during the COVID season, and there weren't people there.
Right.
They desperately, or at least this is an Indiana fan base.
Yeah.
That desperately wants to see Michigan beaten in person.
Yeah. And that matters for sure.
Because college football 25, the loading screen if you choose Indiana as your favorite team, right? All the loading screens, I think they have a little ticket from a famous game, you know?
Right.
The ticket that shows up is Memorial Stadium in 1987, the last time Indiana beat Michigan with people in the stands.
Wow.
They want to see it bad. And there's a chance. There's a good chance, I think.
I mean, yeah, they're 2 touchdown favorites. It should happen. So it's just a matter of, what it looks like. All right. Moving right along, we have the 4-4 Maryland Terrapins heading out west to take on the 9-0 number 1 ranked Oregon Ducks. This is a 6 p.m. game on the Big Ten Network. The line is Oregon by 25. So, I mean, what do you want me to say about this? Oregon's the best team in the country. Maryland is once again in free fall in November. This is the worst possible matchup for Maryland at a time they are playing terribly. Last time out, they got crushed by Minnesota in a game that was over by the end of the first quarter, and that's not an exaggeration. And that's what I see here. I see Oregon QB Dylan Gabriel coming out hot, hitting some plays downfield. I think the Ducks will be able to run the ball at will against Maryland. I think Terrapins QB Billy Edwards is going to be running for his life against an elite Oregon defense. I think this is a huge mismatch, and I believe once again Oregon gets far enough ahead that Maryland will just roll over and die, as they so often have under Mike Locksley late in the season. I've got the Oregon Ducks 52, the Maryland Terrapins 10. Dom, what do you think?
This feels like a game from the old Big Ten East. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Every week in the Big Ten East, as an Indiana fan, I can attest, right? There was a top 5 team, whether it was Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan, and they would play a team having a rough year. Rutgers, Maryland, Indiana. There was always one.
Michigan State.
Michigan State was some years.
The latter half,
yeah.
Since the post-Antonio era.
Yeah. And hey, sometimes when that happened, there was a weird, fluky upset. It was never Indiana that pulled the weird, fluky upset, but there was one sometimes.
Sure.
Now, usually that happened when that underdog team had one thing that they could do really well. And Maryland's got it. Billy Edwards can throw.
Yeah. And
Ty Felton can catch.
Yes. Yeah, he's great.
Maryland is a top 10 team for passing yards.
Yep.
Oregon is also a top 15 team for passing yards.
Yeah.
Oregon's pass defense might not be great. It's mid-pack in the Big Ten.
Yeah.
Maryland's is dead last.
Yeah.
Now, maybe this turns into a shootout. It could happen.
Sure.
But even if it does, I like the Ducks. Good team beats bad team. But I think Maryland might just score. I'll take Oregon 43, Maryland 31.
Oh, okay. So you're thinking that, yeah, okay. I mean, Maryland, look, they've got two great receivers. Those guys can make plays. Those guys can score points. So I could totally see that happening. I just could also see them getting absolutely executed. And I'm just really down on Mike Locksley. I am. We go through this every year with Maryland. They look awesome in September every year. And then every year in October and November, they fall apart at the seams. And the best they did was when they had a senior Leah Tagovailoa and a senior offensive line. They got to 8-5, and that's it. So I just don't. And this is, there's no, and Leah Tagovailoa is not coming out of that tunnel. So, yeah, I just don't. I don't know. I'm down on Maryland. I think it's going to be ugly.
And it well could be. I would rather see the game that I picked.
Yes, me too.
If I've got to watch one on TV.
Yeah.
But I don't think picking Maryland to only lose by 12 should be construed as thinking they have any chance to win.
No. I understand.
I just think they might be able to score.
Yeah, for sure. And it's possible, especially if they catch the Ducks sleeping a little bit.
Oh, and it could be one of those where Oregon is up for 3 scores the whole second half, and it ends with a fluke field goal or a tip pass or something silly to make it a 2-score game.
Sure.
I don't think Maryland is in this, but I do think that they'll feel good if they can move the ball.
Yeah,
but there's no way they're stopping Oregon from doing exactly what they want all the time when the Ducks have the ball, especially in Eugene.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. All right, moving on to the last game of the day already, because there's only 6 of them. We've got the 5-4 Washington Huskies heading to State College for a whiteout to take on the 7-1 number 6 Penn State Nittany Lions. This is a 7 p.m. game on Peacock. The line is Penn State by 13. So Peacock got the later night slot this week as NBC opted to take Minnesota Rutgers as their NBC game. And it feels like this game has been relegated to Peacock for a reason. Penn State put up a valiant effort, but ultimately lost to number 2 Ohio State by a TD last week. The Nittany Lions offense didn't score a offensive touchdown. So expect the offense to look for redemption this week against a decent but unspectacular Steve Belichick coach defense. I expect Drew Aller to be healthier and to play better than he did against Ohio State. A week after Penn State mysteriously gave him only 5 targets, I think we see a monster game out of Tyler Warren at tight end. I'm talking 10-plus catches, 125-plus yards through the air. I think he will have a few rushes as well. Nick Singleton and Katron Allen will also get back on track after a rough outing against the Buckeyes where they couldn't get anything going. That said, Washington is playing with a lot of confidence right now after the big win over USC last week. Will Rogers has been very productive. Jonah Coleman is one of the best running backs in college football, and Washington can score points running the ball with Jonah Coleman and throwing the ball to both Denzel Boston and Giles Jackson. So I think this is close for a while. That said, Penn State's D is fantastic, and I don't think Washington's going to be able to move the ball for 4 quarters. I think they'll have some good scoring drives, but I'm also predicting some 3-and-outs and turnovers against a really good Penn State defense. So, Dom, what do you see here?
This would be a really good win for Penn State, right? Penn State, like Indiana, suffers from the schedule argument. In their case, it's not who have you played, it's who have you beaten.
Right.
Who is Penn State's best win? Is it Illinois?
Probably. Right? Yeah.
Well, now it would be Washington. Same goes for the Huskies. Their best win is Michigan, which is it a better win than Illinois? I don't know. But Penn State would certainly be a better win. It would make Washington Bowl eligible. It would vault them up into some of those conversations, second tier in the Big Ten.
Sure.
But I don't think this one's going to be pretty.
Yeah.
Both teams' calling cards are on defense, right? I think that an average Big Ten fan knows the names of both defensive coordinators in this game.
Yeah, it's true.
Right? And it helps that one of them is named Belichick. It helps that one of them was a head coach for years.
Yep.
They both contain the passing game pretty well. Penn State did a wonderful job against Ohio State, keeping them contained. They just couldn't score any points. Right? Washington has really been able to lock down teams through the air. The problem is Washington hasn't been able to stop people from running.
No.
Southern California ran for 166. Indiana ran for 188 in a game where Indiana was going to be running the ball because their backup quarterback was playing.
Right.
So I think the Katron Allens, the Nicholas Singletons of the world are going to have an easier time moving the ball than Jonah Coleman's going to. And this, to me, just seems like the sort of game that a James Franklin Penn State team wins by one score. And then when we're sitting down to preview next season, we forget that it was just one score. We forget how terribly ugly it was. And we just say, they beat a decent Washington team.
Sure.
I'm glad it's on Peacock because that means I won't be watching it. I think the final score is Penn State 18, Washington 12.
Interesting. I think Penn State's really motivated. I think Andy Kotelnicki is facing questions about why he's getting paid so much money.
If not, he should be.
If not, he absolutely should be. Or is the question, why does James Franklin ruin offensive coordinators who are successful everywhere else? So I think Penn State comes out with a really good game plan. I think they're going to be really locked in for this. I think Tom Allen's defense is going to have trouble with Washington for a while, but when they figure them out, they're going to have them figured out, and Abdul Carter is going to eat, and he's probably going to force a turnover at some point. And I just think Penn State has a better defense and more firepower, and they have more to prove. So, and here's the other thing. It's a whiteout. And At night. And I've been to a Penn State whiteout at night, and you cannot hear yourself think. It is the loudest. I've been to the Shoe. I've been to loud games. I saw Michigan, Ohio State in the Shoe. But a Penn State whiteout was louder, magnitude louder. It was wild. So I saw a Minnesota team fall apart and have several false starts, because they couldn't communicate. I think that's going to happen to Washington. I think it's going to be loud, like they're not used to it being loud like Autzen is allegedly loud, but is it as loud as a whiteout? Maybe it is, man, but I don't know. I have a hard time believing anything could be as loud as a whiteout. So I've got the Penn State Nittany Lions 34, the Washington Huskies 16. And yes, I think Penn State forces 2 or 3 turnovers.
I mean, I believe it, and that would be a good win for Penn State.
Yeah.
That would be something that would make the case that Penn State belongs where the playoff committee has them sitting.
Yeah, and that they deserve to host a playoff game.
Yes. I have also heard it said that James Franklin's destiny is to be the first coach to lose a home playoff game. And I don't know why I've become the anti-James Franklin podcast voice here on We Live for Saturday, because I think he's a really good coach.
Great coach. Great program builder. Recruiter.
Sometimes you get saddled with the inability to win the big one. You know, speaking of for members of that Penn State coaching staff, that's kind of how it felt with Tom Allen with bowl games with Indiana. He went to 3. Right? No, the only other coach to go to that many bowl games as Indiana coach is Bill Maller.
Right.
And he lost every single one of them.
Sure.
Never by more than a score.
Ugh, rough.
Famously didn't have the hands team out against Tennessee in the Gator Bowl when they kicked it in an obvious onside kicking situation. Tennessee got the ball back and scored.
Brutal.
Couldn't rally late and lost a 2-point game against Utah in a bowl game. That was right after he became head coach, I think. That was the Kevin Wilson team that Allen took over for.
Right.
So sometimes you get saddled with that. I don't think that's James Franklin's fault, but I also think it's empirically true that he hasn't won the big one.
I think he makes bad in-game decisions on a regular basis. And I go back to when Ohio State was playing Penn State in, 2016, I want to say. And Trace McSorley's playing the game of his life. He's thrown for 400 yards. He's unstoppable. The guy has just got magic in that hand. And it's 4th and 5. And you're thinking, this is when our senior quarterback wins the game. And James Franklin called a run up the middle inside zone to Saquon Barkley. And I thought to myself, 4th and 5? And you thought you could get there running the ball when you have a guy who's playing the best a quarterback who's playing the best ball of his life, who's playing at the top of the college football. And since then, James Franklin does make mistakes like that. You saw it. You saw his decision-making, the play calling you can't tell me James Franklin didn't have his hands in the play calling on that goal line stand at the end.
Yeah. And that was
against Ohio State. I mean,
it was reminiscent. I was going to say it was reminiscent. And obviously I don't think Tom Allen is calling offensive plays at Penn State, but it was reminiscent of last year's Indiana Louisville game.
Right.
Where on downs, when you had a choice, you chose the worst option.
Yes.
Right? And then when you didn't have a choice, your hand is forced.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I felt like having Penn State. I think they would have had a better chance to score on that 4th and goal, handing the ball off again.
Probably. Or they could have at least thrown it at Tyler Warren instead of their backup tight end. And I'm thinking they're like, well, Tyler Warren was covered. I was like, Tyler Warren had a one-on-one. Throw him the ball.
Yeah.
Just do it.
You're going to face man coverage.
Yeah.
At that point in that situation.
I don't care if there are 2 guys on him. Throw him the ball.
You have to hope that your all Big Ten level tight end is going to be able to go up and body a defender and get that ball.
Yeah. Instead of throwing it to a lesser player. And he also was handing the ball to Katron Allen when his best running back is Nicholas Singleton. It's not close. It's not close. Singleton is way, way better than Allen. I'm just saying, like James Franklin in big games, it's like he forgets to give the ball to his best players. He makes weird decisions in big games. So I do think his rep is his fault. And I think he recruits well enough that he should be a lot better in games against ranked teams than he is. So I do still think he's a great coach. I think he's a great program builder. And I think Penn State's probably going to host a playoff game this year. But like, this is where I also won't be shocked if he goes to Minnesota and loses in 3 weeks at all. Even a little bit.
I think that James Franklin is a legendary coach at a place like Vanderbilt.
Totally.
Where he was.
Yes.
Right?
He was great at Vandy.
And I think you become kind of an infamous coach at a place like Penn State.
Yeah.
And again, hey, he can fix all of that by just
this year. He can do it this year.
Just going out there and win every game that you've got left on that regular season schedule. No one is going to think that Penn State should lose a single one of those.
No, they'll be favored.
They'll be favored every step of the way.
Yeah.
And then you waltz right into the play because you're not going to have to worry about a Big Ten championship game if you're Penn State in all likelihood.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Some stuff would have to get real weird for Penn State to make it back up into that game based on the tiebreakers.
Yes.
And so a one-loss Penn State team, you get into those playoffs. You host a home playoff game. You may wind up lined up against a conference champion from, say, the ACC, right?
Well, not a champion, but like a runner-up.
No. In their second game.
Oh, in the second game. Sure.
In their second game.
Yeah.
You host a game, you win a game, you line up against an ACC,
and you'll be
ACC or a Big 12 champion.
Yeah,
there.
absolutely. You could be playing Miami or something. Absolutely. Or BYU or whatever. Yeah.
And all of a sudden, there's old Pennsylvania State University.
Yep.
Semifinals. One game, anything could happen.
Yep.
And James Franklin no longer can't win the big one. But again, his destiny may be to be the first coach to lose a home playoff game.
It's true.
And it wouldn't be surprising then either.
No.
So.
No, all options are on the table for sure. All right, Dom, we did it. We got through all the games.
There weren't as many this week.
I know, just the 6. So it'll be easier for me to keep track of. I appreciate that. And it's a little less for me to go back through, but not the craziest week of games on the way it looks. But this season, we've seen weeks when we thought there weren't going to be a bunch of upsets, and there have been a bunch of upsets. Oh, so don't be surprised if there's a couple upsets this weekend either.
Oh, absolutely. I don't think I picked a single one, but UCLA has looked game.
Oh, yeah.
Rutgers is coming off a bye. And again, you pointed it out. There's a lot of familiarity there. When you get coaching staffs that know each other, things can get funky.
Yes.
Right? I don't think it'll happen, but I've seen bad Purdue teams do strange things to Ohio State. But you never know. Michigan's going to want to prove that they're still Michigan.
Yeah. When Sharon Moore has got to prove that he still deserves to have his job. Because I think that Sharon Moore is going to be on a very hot seat if he ends up, if he let's say he gets crushed against Indiana, which is on the table.
It is.
He gets crushed against Indiana and he ends up 6-6 and then ends up 6-7 or something, or even 7-6 going into next year. Like, they're going to expect a lot better than that.
Yeah. Well, the only game on Michigan's schedule left that isn't against a top 10 team is Northwestern.
Yep.
And
they should get Northwestern, but they're not going to beat Ohio State, probably.
Not in Columbus, they're not.
No, and again, it's an uphill battle against Indiana too. So yeah.
We will see, I think, at least one of these games go in a direction we're not expecting, but that's why we love to watch it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. If you want to check us out, we are on Twitter at We Live for B1GSat. You can hit me up on Twitter at Alibaba26. And Dom, what's your handle again?
I am at Dom the Rev.
At Dom the Rev. That easy enough. Awesome. Yeah. So thank you so much for listening and enjoy your weekend of football. And we will be back to review all the games on Monday.
Subscribe on YouTube.
Everybody, please and thank you.